Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the EU Transport Day at COP28, and thank you for being here with us this morning in Dubai and online. Maraban fil yawm al-nakul, as you saw on the screens entering here on the COP28. My name is Harold Ruiters. I'm Acting Deputy Director General and Director also for Investments and Sustainable and of the Transport and DG Move. Transport is today the subject of the COP presidency here, and it inspired us to organize a day on transport events in this EU pavilion. Before we start, let me give you a brief introduction to what will be the overview of today. In a few minutes, the European Commission Director General of Mobility and Transport, Mrs. Magda Kopczynska, will join us here for opening remarks. Directly after that, at 10 o'clock, we will start with the first panel of the day to kick off with the panelists that you already see here on the stage on climate resilience of infrastructure. At 12 o'clock then, Director General Magda Kopczynska will be back here on stage for a fireside chat and then a panel discussion on alternative fuels in shipping. And at 2:30, we will continue with a panel debate on sustainable aviation fuels and greening aviation. It will be followed then in the afternoon with a debate on the challenges of global interconnection on hydrogen valleys and a discussion on the role of critical raw materials. And to close up the day, we hope to see you all back here at 7 o'clock for the closing remarks of my Director General and an evening reception to connect with the speakers and professionals from various industries. But for now, let me over to Magda Kopczynska. Please, Magda, join us on stage.
Thank you, Harold, and a very warm good morning. Warm to those who are here, and equally warm for those who are watching online. The weather in Dubai is what weather in Dubai is in December. But thank you so much for joining us here for this kickoff of transport talks in the EU pavilion for the Transport Day in COP28, and. It's very encouraging to actually see a Transport Day in a COP event. Those of us who have been following COPs and transport know that it has not always been so obvious to put transport so much in the focus of debate on climate change in the context of COP. We all have seen what are the estimates and what are the advice and statements from scientists when it comes to climate change. I don't need to tell anybody here or outside how important this COP can be and should be if we are talking about the future of our planet. We have targets ahead that need to be agreed on, and we have targets ahead that, according to many, are almost impossible to reach. Transport has an important role to play, and I do believe that transport will have a role to play. Bringing it back from the global dimension more to the European Union dimension, transport has been put very much at the center of the European Green Deal that was announced in 2019 by the President of the Commission, and we have a clear target of reducing transport emissions by 90% in 2050 to make sure that EU is carbon neutral by 2050. Again, like many other targets when it comes to climate change, not easy to achieve, and we will not do it without people who will be here talking to us and with you throughout the rest of the day. There are things that have to happen at political level, there are things that have to happen at company level, there are things that can and will be happening also at the individual level, because this is how important taking care of climate is. And at the same time, we must not forget that when we talk about transport, we look not only at the important contribution that transport can and will make to reducing climate change, but we also have to have at the back of our heads that transport is an indispensable piece of how the planet, EU, countries and cities function climate is needed to connect people, transport is needed to connect people and to connect companies. And this connectivity, the backbone of international trade, is something that we have to balance out or balance in together with the commitments and ambitions that we want to deliver when it comes to climate. I like to think that the approach we have put forward at the EU level is the right one, with a very strong political signal, policy signal, regulatory signal, strategies, including sustainable and smart mobility strategy, with many actions that we invited ourselves, EU member states and companies in the EU to do in order to make sure that indeed transport in the EU is smart and sustainable. But ever since we put that strategy on the table, many things have been happening also outside the EU that on the one hand bring a bit more hope, but on the other hand stress again how big the challenge is. And let me now, you've heard from Harold what we will be talking about during the day, so I'm not going to go into details, but let me mention two sectors that I find interestingly more visible and more talked about in the context of COP28 than it has happened before. And here I mean aviation and maritime, two international sectors not originally really there when it comes to Paris Agreement, although opinions differ to what extent aviation and maritime were accounted for with the Paris targets. But now with the two communities headed by two international organizations, ICAO and IMO, I like to think we have a strong commitment that those two sectors have a schedule ahead, a pathway ahead, and also a way to get there when it comes to delivering their share of decarbonization. We'll talk more about shipping first, and then even more about aviation. So I'm not going to talk a lot about it now because for the sake of time, I don't want to do it. But I think when we talk about transport, we must not forget that transport is a complex ecosystem, and that when we are talking about decarbonization of transport, we need to think about all the elements of that ecosystem. And when I talk ecosystem, I mean not just the vehicles, the cars, the planes, the ships, the trains that carry us and goods, but also everything that is around those vehicles. And here I'm talking about infrastructure. We have made it clear at the European Union level that when it comes to infrastructure, the way infrastructure is designed, the purpose for which infrastructure is designed, has to have this climate thinking at the core of it. But more and more, with recent impacts of climate change, with fires, floods, landslides, we are seeing that the infrastructure that we have in place needs to be re-looked at from the point of view of climate resilience. We realize, and you'll hear a lot about climate resilience again in the panel that is coming immediately after my opening remarks, but I think we haven't been focusing so much on climate resilience a couple of years ago. We talked about resilience of infrastructure because of the wear and tear, but now it's absolutely clear that what we build, how we build it, where we build it, and even occasionally if we build it, is a very significant decision to be taken and not to be taken lightly. And this dimension of resilience of infrastructure is something that is pretty demanding if you think about decisions concerning infrastructure investments that will stay with us for 20, 30 years to come. And maybe just the last point that I wanted to make in this opening remarks, there is a reason why we have been very keen on having this Transport Day here in COP28, because as much as I'm continuously proud of how we have approached discussions about transport and climate change at the European Union level, European Union is not existing in the void. European Union is a part of a bigger world. And that's why it's so important that here, in the context of COP, many of us talk not just to the EU crowd, but also to people outside, because we cannot address climate change on our own. as perfect as we can think European Union policies are. And we have been doing that and will continue doing that through various transport dialogues that we hold as DG Move and as the Commission, through the programs that the European Union have put forward, such as the Global Gateway, where the element of funding and financing projects all over the world that will contribute to climate change objectives is an important element of this multi-billion funding program of the European Union. But it is also important that we have here an opportunity to listen and to hear and to learn from people coming from outside the EU, because we need to find a shared and agreed way of moving forward when it comes to dealing with this impossible challenge ahead that is namely the climate change. On this, I leave you here now. I hand over to Harold for the next 1 hour of fun of his panel, and I'll be back with you shortly to talk again about shipping. Thank you.
Thank you, Magda. Thank you for those inspiring opening words, and very happy to take on in this first discussion of today on the new Transport Day in COP. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to welcome you here in the room and online for this panel debate on building resilient transport networks, strategies for protecting infrastructure against climate change. As Magda already highlighted, we have serious threats to the transport systems across the globe. And on several occasions in the past year, we have seen incidents that are caused by natural disasters due to extreme weather events, which have significantly interrupted transport flows all over the world. In this context, it's important to gain knowledge and explore different perspectives on the risks and opportunities, and that we have approaches that can be taken in Europe and globally in determining climate adaptation needs and implementing targeted adaptation efforts to make transport networks more resilient to the impacts of climate change. So we will discuss here in the panel the fields of climate change, finance, construction and digital for preparing and adapting the transport infrastructure for such impacts. And we will address main questions like what are the biggest challenges linked to making transport networks more climate resilient, how can we best adapt them, what are the roles for funding and digital technology, and how can we best mobilize the resources for achieving climate resilience objectives. I will do that with a distinguished panel here, and from my left onwards I have first Professor Wim Thierry, Associate Professor at the Department of Hydrology and Hydraulic Engineering at Vrije Universiteit Brussels, and an IPCC researcher currently engaged in a study on climate change vulnerability of the European transport network, and he will show us where we stand in science on the need to adapt and the risks involved in how we should be if we fail to do so. Then next sitting to him is Mr. Adam Ellman, Head of Sustainability at Google, will speak about how deploying digital technology could increase the resilience of transport networks to climate change risks. Then we have Mrs. Isabel Spiegel, Global Head of Environment at Vinci Construction, who will tell us about the concrete measures and best practices in adapting transport infrastructure to the impacts of climate change. And finally, Rachel Baza, the Associate Director on Climate Adaptation and Nature Finance at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. She will elaborate on the role of funding in developing resilient transport networks and the costs of inaction. All speakers will elaborate their ideas and provide with insights in this debate. And then we will turn to you, the audience, online and here with us also in the room to give you perspective and ask us any questions that you may have. Throughout the panel, we will be using Slido, and I hope that you will be actively contributing online and here in the room to give us your questions, the views and main takeaways that you will have. And I would like to launch right now a first question to all of you, where I would like to ask you that you can type in one word that comes to your mind when you think about climate resilience and transport. You have 2 minutes to reflect and come up, and I see that the code was there but is perhaps not there anymore to give your word and see what comes out of this word cloud. Can we have the barcode also in the room? It's coming. It's there. Perfect. Thank you very much. So if you can give all of you one word that you would associate with climate resilience and transport. And I'll go perhaps already the word that comes up to your mind. Wim, one word.
Extreme events. Extreme events.
Extreme events.
You're putting me on the spot now. One word. Well, I think one word's tough. I'm gonna say more to do.
More to do.
I was going to say not ready yet.
Not ready yet.
And systemic challenge.
Systemic challenge. I would say from my side, disruption. So please come on with your words. Then we will see what will come out of this Google Cloud. Meanwhile, we will prepare for the first round of exchange, and I would like to ask, of course, all of the panelists that are with us to make a 3-minute introduction and go around the floor for how you see climate change, resilience in transport. And Wim, you will be the first to speak, but we wait a little moment still more for the cloud to develop. Good, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for this short exchange. We see quite a few words there still coming up, even cycling I see now coming up, and climate resilience, that's nice. Risk assessment, accessibility, but floods being the most important word. Wim, when you would address the cloud and see how this reflects also in your opening statement, please.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed. We see a big word, floods, in the middle, and I would like to talk a little bit about that. But before I do, and I will explain you a slide which is showing some of the recent results of a study of ours. I would like to ask you in the audience a question. I have a son who was 0 years old in 2020 and a mother who was 60 years old in 2020. Now, would you think that a newborn will experience more climate extremes than a 60-year-old? If you agree on this, if you think this is the case, can you raise your hand? Who thinks that a newborn will experience more climate extremes than a 60-year-old? I think we all are at COP, so we should be knowing that the answer to this is yes. But then comes the next question, and the next question is, sure, but how many more? And this is something that we didn't really have the answer to until recently. Because in a recent study, we quantified the total number of climate extremes that a person will experience across their lifetime. We performed these calculations and published those in a paper in Science. We performed those calculations for every generation born between 1960 and 2020, for every country in the world, and for every plausible future warming pathway. And the results are shown in this figure that you can see here, which shows what we call exposure multiplication factors. How many more climate extremes you will experience relative to living in a world without climate change. We did these calculations for 6 types of climate extremes, including wildfires, crop failures, droughts, river floods, heat waves, and tropical cyclones. And for each combination of age on the horizontal axis and global warming level on the vertical axis, you can find a color. And this color tells you how many more climate extremes you will experience across your lifetime. Now you see in these graphs that the younger you are and the higher the level of global warming, the more climate extremes you will experience across your lifetime. People over 50 have very little color difference in the vertical, which means that the future level of warming, future warming pathway has very little influence on their lifetime extreme event exposure. But the younger you are, the more the colors differ in the vertical. So the more the future warming pathway directly impacts your lifetime exposure to climate extremes. If we just take one example, a 6-year-old under a 3-degree warming pathway, which is the current pathway given current policies, we find that this 6-year-old will experience twice as many wildfires, twice as many tropical cyclones, 3 times more river floods, 4 times more crop failures, 5 times more droughts, and 36 times more heat waves compared to living in a world without climate change. Without going into technical details, you also see some gray lines on this graph. If you're to the right or above of these gray lines, you will live what we call an unprecedented life. Now you see perhaps that there's no gray lines in the middle column. This means that for heat waves and crop failures, every generation born since 1960 under any future warming pathway will experience unprecedented exposure to crop failures and heat waves. If you're under 40, you will in addition live an unprecedented life in terms of lifetime exposure to droughts and river floods, and this even under the most ambitious pathway limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees by the end of this century. Now, from these results, one can only conclude that we must limit global warming to 1.5 degrees to safeguard the future of current young generations. I will talk more about transport later in the panel, but I will leave it here for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wim, and great to have you as an IPCC author and scientist exposing us to these facts and figures and clear graphs. It's really impressive, and I'm grateful also for the work that you're doing. You will come back to that later on. Adam, I turn to you. What are your opening statements if you think about how climate resilience is approached in your field of work, and how that is addressing also transport in particular? Adam, please.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. And thank you to the EU for putting on this panel and inviting me to speak. I think this is such an important topic, and Wim has reminded us why we are all here today. Pretty depressing, but actually, at Google, we fundamentally believe that technology is going to be a critical part of helping to address both climate mitigation and adapting and building in resiliency to our systems. And at Google, we think we've got a unique opportunity to help lead the transition in 2 particular ways. Firstly, by making information accessible, and secondly, by driving forward innovation. And we're seeing increasing breakthroughs in the use of technology such as AI in really helping unlock and driving progress in many of these spaces. And at Google, we actually have an overarching goal in terms of how we're helping others through our tools and our technology. We have an ambition to help save gigatons worth of GHG emissions by 2030 and every single year. So that's helping others through our tools and our technology. And alongside that, we want to also help with this issue of adaptation and resiliency. So maybe just to bring to life some of the ways in which we're doing that, starting with individuals. And we're privileged that we have billions of people that come to our tools and our platforms like Google Search, YouTube, Maps, every single day. So maybe starting with Maps. Google Maps has been helping people for many years get around more sustainably. We've shown you what are walking routes, what are cycling routes. We serve up information about what public transportation options may be available to you. And we're always looking to improve on that. We've recently added hundreds and thousands of kilometers of cycling routes to Google Maps in Europe. More recently, we've been working on helping drivers through an AI solution called fuel efficient routing, which will surface up the most fuel efficient route if it's not already the fastest route, using AI to predict that, helping people save on fuel emissions, helping people save on money. And in 2 years, that's helped reduce emissions by 2.4 million tons. That's the same as taking 500,000 electric vehicles off the road every single year. We also want to help people with modal shift, and actually we recently launched a new solution in France where if you're looking for a driving route, if there is other alternatives that are similar in terms of timing, we will automatically surface that up. So maybe say, hey, I know you were looking to drive, but did you know there was a walking route or a public transportation route? And we'll continue to look at how we can help with modal shifting. And then more broadly, in terms of things like Google Search, we want to help people as they're searching for those more sustainable solutions. Increasingly, we're seeing people search for electric vehicles. How do we surface up the information such as distance, how they compare to other vehicles, so that they can help make those more informed choices? But it's not just about helping individuals. We work closely with partners, whether that's companies, cities, governments, and we also want to provide tools and solutions there as well. One of the ways we've been helping actually in the airline industry is by creating an open source model to calculate the emissions associated with flying at an individual level. And we've open sourced that and we've made that available and worked so that others can adopt as well. So we've worked with groups such as Travelist and the International Council on Clean Transportation, because we want to make sure if this information is being surfaced, it's the same everywhere. So if you're looking at Google Flights, you see the same on booking.com, you'll see the same everywhere else. So we can make sure it's a trusted source. Again, helping people make more informed decisions. Sticking with aviation, one of the areas we've been working on recently is contrails. If you don't know what contrails are, those are thin white clouds you see behind an aeroplane. And surprisingly, it was a surprise to me, they actually account for 35% of aviation's global warming potential. So after fuel, it's the next biggest impact area. And contrails don't always occur, but we've been using AI to figure out what conditions they occur, and been working with Breakthrough Energy and American Airlines to test this. We've tested it on 70 flights, and we were able to reduce contrails by 54%. So a huge impact without changing any infrastructure building into existing systems. One other example I'll give in this space is our work with traffic junctions. So start-stop traffic actually has 29 times more emissions than free-flowing traffic. And again, we've been using AI here to figure out what are the changes we need to make to increase free-flowing traffic. Not a single junction, but around all junctions, so you get these sort of lanes of free-flowing traffic. And we've deployed this in 12 cities, everywhere from sort of Abu Dhabi through to Manchester. It's now covering 30 million cars every single month, and we've been able to increase flowing traffic by 30%. So again, really having a huge impact. And again, the great thing here is we just send small bits of changes through to the city. It works with existing infrastructure. So no massive changes, they can make tweaks and have a huge impact. The final point I'll leave you on is, whilst we're very focused, obviously, coming up with these solutions, we know we can only be credible if we're looking after our own house as well. So we're also very focused on making sure our infrastructure, our data centers, our energy use is as sustainable as can be. It's something we've focused on for many, many years since the company was founded. We've been operating on 100% renewable electricity at an annual level since 2017. But we now have an ambitious goal to be net zero by 2030, and we actually want to have a higher standard for our clean energy procurement, and we want to source clean energy every hour of every single day locally. So we know it's important that we can come up with these solutions, but equally we want to make sure we're operating sustainably ourselves. Very much looking forward to the conversation, and happy to hand over to the next speaker.
Yeah, Adam, thank you very much. Very insightful, and also already telling us about solutions that you are putting in place very concretely. So I turn now to Isabel. Can you also give your views on how you see climate resilience being approached in the work that you are doing? Isabel.
Yeah, sure. So good morning, everyone. So yeah, I started with my word being not ready yet. And the fact is that we're struggling with two different sides of a story. At Vinci, we operate infrastructure mobility, so like airports, highways, railways, and we also build mobility and energy infrastructure. So, and these are the two brains of the story I want to really express. We launched some internal working group already 6 years ago on climate resiliency, because we need to mitigate the risks in the operations that we really have. And you know that it's a concession business, so we operate airport, highways, railways for several decades. So that's the contract we have, and we have to anticipate and make sure that the service we are providing to the user is indeed resilient, including in the happening of extreme weather events. So that's the risk management approach that we started with. A year ago, we decided to move this working group to the name of adaptation, focusing on physical climate risk, but for the construction business as well. Because that's the other side of the story, where currently I have a feeling that a very limited number of clients are asking us to really integrate the new curves that Wim was showing us. And very recently, I was traveling in Africa, for instance, where we are building a road very close to the sea level, close to a laguna as well, in a part of the world where there are a storm event every year. And the design of the road is made with a level which is a 10 years event level, which is the usual standard, which is probably not aligned with the curve that we just show. And that's the issue that we have, and that's why I put not ready yet, because we do a lot on mitigation, we do not enough, and we need to keep really doing all what we can to reduce the quantities of emissions, including on the road transport, aviation, maritime, etc., etc. And at the building phase of these infrastructures, there's a lot that we can do from scratch. But resiliency is another fact that we need to integrate from the beginning into the design. So just an example also of what we came up with in this internal working group on climate adaptation now is a tool. So I totally agree with Google that we need to access to data, information, etc. Where we said, okay, let's at least try to be proactive and show to our team, project team, but also to our clients, what would be the exposure of the infrastructure we are currently designing and building to the extreme weather event. And we do that tool clearly to be able to provide some solutions. So how can we adapt from the beginning the infrastructure to be more resilient in case of weather event?
Thank you, Isabel. And ladies and gentlemen, Isabel is also working with us on decarbonized construction. One of the other themes that we are exploring in DG Move in order to build in a decarbonized way. One of the more difficult themes when we think about cement and steel and all those kind of factors. But thank you for exposing and putting so clearly that also from our side, I mean also in DG Move where we have a Connecting Europe facility and we are building for billions projects around, we have 1,000 projects in portfolio, perhaps not taking into account the standards that we should have for being climate resilient in these infrastructures. So I turn now to our last speaker, and very happy that you joined us, Rachel. What would be your views from your field of work?
Thank you. So for those who don't know us, the EBRD is a development bank, and that means we invest in all sectors across our country's operation. And those countries span from Morocco to Mongolia and from Egypt to Estonia, and then from 2025 moving into a few countries in sub-Saharan Africa as well. So we invest using a variety of financial instruments. We blend in donor funds to provide concessional finance and credit enhancements, and we provide technical cooperation to increase client capacity and to promote the general transition to well-functioning market economies. In terms of transport, we invest at the national level and at the sub-sovereign and municipal levels in linear infrastructure, roads and rails, standalone airports, seaports, bus infrastructure. And we see this transport infrastructure as real critically enabling to the connectedness of our economies, and therefore really essential to delivering on that transition mandate that the bank has. But the bank is also really committed to the green economy transition. And when we talk about the transport sector and green finance, the conversation has mostly anchored around mitigation. And that makes sense. It's an urgent need. Investing in mitigation has immediate and really visible impact. But the needs of climate resilience investment are also huge. And the EBRD approaches that in two primary ways. So first, we look at situations where there's already a physical climate-related risk or an imminently emerging or escalating one, and we invest in hardening or protecting the assets against those physical risks. So we look at slope stabilization for railways that are at risk from landslides in Kyrgyz Republic, for example, or we protect coastal assets like ports from sea level rise and increasing storm surge in North Africa. So these are some of the investments we make in retrofitting existing assets. But really critically important is that mainstreaming, is that thinking about what we're doing in terms of future planning. Because infrastructure is so long-lived, just as you plan it for future demand, economic development, population growth, you also need to plan it for future extremes of weather and climate risks. So you need to think, again, not just about where the asset's located, but how you engineer it and whether you build it at all. I think it was a fantastic point in the opening. So when we think about that long-term planning, the EBRD has for many years assessed the physical climate risk exposure of our projects because it's good due diligence, it's sound banking. But since 2023, we've implemented a Paris Agreement alignment process within the bank to ensure that all of our projects, transport included, are appropriately considering and responding to the expected future climate risks. So we hope that through enhancing the specific project resilience, these investments can contribute to wider systemic resilience as well.
Thank you very much, Rachel, for your opening statement, and very clearly already points that I can see that we can combine in our discussion how we will get to the next more in-depth discussions here. I would like to ask you, of course, afterwards, all of you, where you see the biggest challenges to come. But I would like to start one more time with Wim, because Wim, you already highlighted or hinted at the fact that you are executing this study and that you would like to go a little bit in depth, not on the general, let's say, trajectories that you painted for us, like the 36 times more risks, etc., per age and per degree of heating. But you're already looking also in our study, of course, in the consequences and, let's say, what are the details in the transport sector. So perhaps you first start with that, and then I come with a few more questions to you.
Thank you very much, Harold. Yeah, indeed. So when it comes to increasing climate extremes, you can calculate the number of people that will experience them, but you can also do this for critical transport infrastructure. And there is a slide in which I would like to show you how many more climate extremes you can expect in Europe, and how this links to critical transport infrastructure being exposed to them. So if you look at this very preliminary results, which are, let's say, being improved and developed as we speak in my team in Brussels, we have on the left here an overview of historical extreme events which have occurred across Europe, and which each icon here on this map is showing which type of climate extreme occurred, and the icons are located in the location of these critical transport segments within the European TEN-T network. And there's some examples, and of course in the water bomb in Belgium is a very famous example in our region, where in 2021 a huge amount of precipitation led to large-scale flooding and railroads and rivers being exposed, being hit. But there's many more examples, as you can see on this map, and there is not a single region in Europe which is spared, basically, if you look at recent events and occurrences. If you then look at those pie charts on the right, you can see basically for each of the 5 transport modes, airports, ports, roads, inland waterways, and railways, what is, let's say, the relative contribution of different forms of climate extremes to these different transport modes. And you can see that that each of these transport modes is being exposed to a range of climate extremes, and there is always a dominant one, but there is not all multiple hazards matter. So this clearly highlights that when you're aiming to make transport modes more resilient, that you have to really look at this range of climate extremes, not just focus on one, not just focus on droughts, low flows in rivers, or to heat waves. And at the bottom of the slide, there's some concrete examples of how this exposure can lead to impact. So you can imagine in case of roads and rail transport that road pavements can crack, rails can buckle due to extreme heat. Airports and ports can experience asphalt melting, concrete bulking due to extreme heat, but are also at risk of river floods or coastal flooding under sea level rise. And waterways, finally, they, for example, are facing risks from sea level rise going into estuaries, but also droughts causing very low water levels and hampering navigability. And so you can see in these pie charts how these extreme events contribute and relatively in each of these modes. Now, looking forward into the future, and this is really maybe the key point I want to highlight, is that, I mean, all of this, what I just said, is just what is happening already now. But as we're moving into a climate which is warmer than today, we will have an escalation of this climate extreme, just like we had children more exposed, we'll have more infrastructure exposed. And we're producing these results as we speak, but just one example here shown is when you look at railroads exposure to heat waves, you see these line plots here. And these 4 different lines represent different climate models. So different, mathematical calculations of how heat waves may evolve as climate warms, as emissions continue. This is a medium-high emission scenario, RCP 6.0. And you see these curves jumping up, going up, starting really kick off now in their upward trajectory. And you see that a heat wave which would, by definition, according to our definition, occur once every 100 years in a world without climate change, escalates to in some of these cases, occurring almost every year by the end of this century. If you look at the green line, which is the French model, almost arriving at 1 by the end of this century, which means that such a one in a century heat wave in absence of climate change, you can expect them to occur every year in this medium-high emission scenario. And not only the frequency, which is shown here, will increase, also these heat waves, they will become longer, they will become even warmer than they are today. And so just to highlight that if you're thinking about resilient transport infrastructure in the future, you have to calculate and plan not for the extremes of today, but when you're building your infrastructure, you have to plan it for the extremes of tomorrow. And that's a key point here, and that's why you need these computer models and these climate and climate impact projections. You have to take them into consideration into your planning of your infrastructure, because the railroads and the tunnels that you're building today, they will be around in 2100 when we'll have a future warmer climate, and whether it will be a 1.5 degree or a 3 degree or a 4 degree warmer world, well, this is being decided at this conference. But adaptation planners should take this information into account and plan for, based on their choice, a best case or a worst case scenario. That's not my decision to make, but my point is take this information into account when you're planning infrastructure for the future in Europe and beyond.
Wow, Wim, I mean, this is such a powerful slide. I mean, there's so many things that come to my mind and that I would like to ask you, and I guess the others as well. Looking at this map, Wim, that you have there of Europe, I think looking now first, let's say, in the COP28 context, the map will be looking the same across the whole world. I mean, this number of incidents that I'm seeing there that you have depicted is not something that is reserved just for Europe. This is all around.
Yes, exactly. So we have a global database of climate change impact, which is called AMDAT. It's a data set, a manual data set compiled to, basically collect all the climate disasters that have happened in the past years. We took that database and we overlaid with those occurrences and those geographical regions affected by these disasters. We overlaid with the technical information about where the critical transport is located. Yeah. So this is the transport map is European, but the disaster database is global. And yes, obviously, this picture that we're seeing in Europe is not just affecting Europe. This is a pattern that we're seeing globally. In the past, there was a lot of talk about climate change happening somewhere else, and we need to act on climate change for future generations not yet born. But I think we're past that narrative now. I think everyone is aware that climate change is now here and it's everywhere. No region is spared and no sector is spared. And if you look at IPCC reports, which are the gold standard and the Bible, I would say, of scientific knowledge on climate change, I did a quick search in the most recent IPCC report when it comes to quantification of climate change impacts on different sectors, and I found basically 1.5 page talking about climate change impacts on the transport sector, half page in one chapter and 1 page in another chapter. And to me, this really highlights that transport is one of these forgotten sectors. There's a lot of talk about climate change impacts on water, on agriculture. We talk a lot with insurers. But actually, transport sector has been traditionally forgotten by climate scientists and impact models. And I think this is time that we change this, and that climate change impact on transport becomes really at the foreground of climate change analysis, the science, so that we're not talking only about mitigation and decarbonizing the transport sector, but we can also talk about how to make the transport sector more resilient and how we can adapt the existing and planned infrastructure to these escalating climate risks.
But before I come to that question, still on the understanding of the slide, which I hope that people at home can also see, it means that this map will be completely filled if I look at your graph. I mean, it will be so dense that none of us will escape. I mean, is that true? Is that correct?
Yeah, so just like a child born today will experience up to 40 times more heat waves under current policy scenarios, and a child born in Africa will experience at least 50 times more heat waves under current policy pledges laid down in the NDCs. Current airports will experience also this same number of increased heat waves, and as I said, they will last longer. They will be more intense. Heat waves is the strongest escalating climate extreme, and we have to look at the most vulnerable components in the system. This may be for a railroad, maybe like some IT infrastructure or some cable melting, which may affect the whole system. Or we can have a railroad which will experience more floods. Yeah. So, but heat waves are the strongest increasing, but we are seeing increases across each of these hazard categories that we've been considering: droughts, wildfires, river floods, tropical cyclones, and heat waves.
But it means that by the time that we are approaching the end of the century, that I will almost not see any green anymore. Question, Wim, because also Isabel is in this room. Ports, I do not see so many dots there. Is that correct, or is it?
Yeah, so the current analysis and our calculations do not yet account for coastal flooding and storm surge that we will expect with future sea level rise. And so we do expect this picture to change as we start to incorporate this in the analysis.
So you're saying this is not yet so much on this map now, but will be firmly on the map in the future. So Isabel, yes. Just that you see that. So you were saying, just to conclude with you, this is not so much addressed in the IPCC reports. Is this also then not so much addressed in science? And then immediately the same, another question, Wim, there, what to do about that? Yes. And what needs to be done about that?
Okay. So the IPCC is not developing new science, it is assessing the available scientific evidence published in the scientific literature. So there are scientific publications made by scientists published, and then the IPCC gathers this information and critically assesses this. So the fact that there is very little text in the IPCC reports on climate change impact on transport implies that there are very little scientific studies that are assessing these risks. And so I'm aware of individual scientific studies, for example, led by the Joint Research Center of the European Commission on exposure of critical infrastructure to climate extremes. There are also other studies looking at individual extreme events and individual transport nodes. But in general, compared to other sectors of the economy and society, there's a real underrepresentation. It's a really understudied sector, and I think it all starts with the scientific community putting this more on their radar, and this can of course happen by stakeholders from policymakers or the industry, well, informing scientists that they really need this information, and then scientists will generate this information and make it publicly and freely available.
No, but the COP's work always on this kind of 6 years trajectory. Would it be possible that by the next, let's say, reporting cycle, we would have that?
Yes, this is definitely possible.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Wim, I guess that you will get questions also from the other panelists, because this is like really dense one. Adam, if you see one of the pictures there, that was the flooding on the 14th of July 2021 in Belgium and Germany. I was traveling back from Stuttgart to Brussels. I got stuck in Aachen. I spent the night there. I was wondering how can I get about and how can I get back at that moment in time. It was extremely difficult. I got back by a brave taxi driver in the end after spending a night in Aachen. I mean, this is directly linked now to the question to you. When you see this, how can we deal with this from the informatics side in the future with AI, but also with tools that you are developing? Please, I mean, and also your insights on this debate here now.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. I mean, many of the tools and solutions that we provide in this context are powered by a platform we run called Google Earth Engine. And Google Earth Engine's been around for a number of years, and it takes it takes data sets from hundreds of satellites, lots of other sources, and combines that with our geospatial and planetary scale cloud computing analytics. And we've made this solution available to scientists and researchers for many years, and but much of the research that you might hear about at COP is from researchers and scientists using that solution. And we've also made it available to corporates and governments and cities, as I'll talk about in a minute. But it's really, and I come back to that point I started with as well at the start, which is that we need data, but we also need to make it accessible and useful. Data in its own right is often doesn't get you to where you need to be. And so this allows us to take this data in a timely, accessible and high resolution format for others to use. So let me bring that to life with some examples, and maybe starting with the sort of facilitating of planning and thinking about policy and infrastructure. So one of the solutions we have built on this is called the Environmental Insights Explorer. It's a freely available solution for cities, covers over 40,000 cities around the world, and it gives them information on buildings, building emissions, on their transport emissions. It has information on their ability to deploy solar. Actually, you were talking about heat alerts. We provide, and issues with heat, information on their tree canopy coverage, so that we can deal with urban heating and really figure out where they should deploy additional tree coverage. We're also putting information about opportunity to deploy cool roofs. So again, using satellite imagery to look at where are those roofs, so you, whether it's sort of solutions like painting them white to really deal with that infrastructure issue. And so transportation is particularly key here. As I say, we get anonymized and aggregated data that we can provide to cities on transportation, letting them understand what transport's coming into a city, traveling around a city, traveling out of a city. And again, we can use technology such as AI and inference to figure out, are they cycling? Are they on a bus? Are they using public transportation? And cities such as Dublin are using this to figure out what policies they want to put in place, what infrastructures they can put in place to increase cycling, in this case here. And the great thing about this data is they can see year on year, are the changes they're making actually having an impact, and adjust accordingly. In terms of climate risk, Wynne here mentioned floods. Floods is an area, particularly riverine flooding, we've been looking at for a long time. And we, in 2018, introduced flood forecasting. And back then, we were able to use AI to predict riverine flooding 48 hours in advance. And with the advancements and breakthroughs in AI, we're now able to do that 7 days in advance to 80 countries around the world, so covering 460 million people, making that information available to governments, to cities, to aid agencies, so that people can get prepared and take action. We're using similar technologies for things like wildfire detection, helping to detect when wildfires occur, but also then to predict what's going to happen, where are they going to spread. Again, helping to people and agencies take action there. And lots of other work in this space, particularly around the weather space, and you'll have seen in recent news some fantastic work my colleagues in Google DeepMind have been doing in terms of really improving weather forecasting beyond anything that's ever been done before. And then the other part of this is how we provide this to individuals. Mm-hmm. Often the first place people go to when an issue is occurring is the search engine. And we want to help them with that information. So again, whether that is just saying, hey, there's an issue here, this is the impact on public transportation, here are some options, or whether it's providing alerting. So alerts to flooding, alerts to wildfires. So again, we really want to provide that information to individuals as well. So yeah, really using this technology to help prepare and helping people take action when these issues do occur.
Hmm. So quick question, Adam. In '92, I was working at Schenker and trucking around still. And at that time, of course, these things were not occurring. But imagine that I would now have to deliver my truckload of goods in Milano. Would you be able to also, based on this on these weather models, to advise to perhaps not go via, let's say, Mont-Cenis, Mont Blanc, but rather to go via Gotha? These kind of, let's say, directing modeling, would that be possible?
Yeah, so there's a lot of work we're doing, particularly with transportation companies who are either using this type of technology to help just improve routing, going back to the efficiency side, the mitigation we spoke about earlier, but absolutely, again, trying to build in this information to deal with these issues both in advance and how we deal with them in real time. And I think it's also important in this context to go, and again, I'm from Google, so you're going to hear me talk a lot about data, technology, and AI. But actually, so much of what we do is working with partners. Partners, like, we're not experts in transportation or infrastructure. So, you know, the tool I mentioned earlier, Environmental Insights Explorer, was actually developed with the Global Covenant of Mayors and C40 and other organizations, where we want to, and in conjunction with cities as well, because we really need to combine the data and the technology with expertise and on-the-ground experience, so that it absolutely does work and adjusts to regional differences as well, because the transport networks in Europe are going to be very different than in Africa and than other parts of the world.
Yeah. Now, you affected already a little bit on the next question I had to you. I mean, where do you see from your side possible gaps? We are developing, as you may have heard, European mobility data space. We are putting in place, let's say, also a number of legislations where data shall be provided on open platforms, on such, we call them national access points. Where do you see gaps that would be necessary to be filled to be able to address the issues that we're talking about?
Yeah, and I sort of two points I'll make, and they're quite high level, but I think they're quite important. The first is, as you said, that there's a lot of fantastic regulation and policy coming from the EU, but how do we make sure they're joined up? How do we make sure they work together? Otherwise, we risk having different policies that just don't collectively have the impact that we want. So firstly, how do we make sure we've got that real joined up policy? The second thing I would talk about is the data and the standards around the data. We were talking about the sort of movements across Europe or movements across the world. If everyone's working individually with their own data sets, working with their own standards, it's very difficult to do that cross-border advice. We were talking about trains the other day. If you want to take the train from one country to another, actually we can probably get you to one border and then you're going to have to jump to a different system. We were talking about ticketing and how do we enable those sorts of things. So I think really about how do we do the standardizations. The more we can make the data standardized, the easier it is for organizations like ourselves and others to help bring that data together, to help make it, again, useful and accessible. Yeah.
That's very clear. I mean, we are aware also these gaps are existing, and also about the silos that are existing today very clearly. And having just launched, in fact, in our most recent package, the EMDS communication and the work strengths that we are also having to address those types of things. But I was really linking it also to the situation where the disruption that Wim described is so big that we will need that type of, let's say, intelligence in order to deal with the emergencies that will be around inevitably, according to Wim. Isabel, you have also seen this graph. You already talked before in your first intervention. So what are for you the first areas where you immediately see the need for action, and what is your, let's say, reaction also to this, let's say, insight?
Yeah, sure. So first reaction is that it's scary. Chloe, I think we should, it's allowed to say it, but I try to stay optimistic and to say that, well, technically, we have solution to anticipate, to make better design, and to avoid too much damages in terms of climate change. When we are facing, or we will face, and we are facing already extreme events, maybe number one challenge is there's no economic model. So that's the key challenge for us. When I look at it from a business perspective, technically we can develop solution. If you look at decrease the emission, all the mitigation side, well, it's not easy. Sometimes the return on investment is very long, but okay, we can calculate something economically. Here we're talking about costs that are potentially enormous. So, and we know that the cost of damages will be far worse than the cost of anticipating the damages, so investing now. But there's no economic model, there's no easy way to put it from the beginning into the infrastructures that we are currently building and operating. So that's the number one challenge. So we're trying to address it through the insurance as well, because when we talk to insurance companies, some of them are telling us, well, there will be dots on the planet, and there is already, or there are already dots on the planet, or a certain kind of activities that will not be insured anymore. So indeed, cost of damages will be for someone else to cover. There will be an increase of a cost, so might be an issue or an opportunity to discuss about how can this increase of a cost of insurance be a kind of funding to invest into the right solution now. but then it's limited amount of money, so that's so this is the part of the story that we are currently working on to try to work together with others, and I'm really happy to be able to keep discussing with you on the table about this. If we do not find an economic model, then we have an issue, because indeed, well, it's not that environment is business everywhere, but no one is clearly tremendously investing in the extra cost of the resiliency. Then, well, clearly the gaps are, I totally agree with what Adam just said about the right methodology and data. So we need data, we need alignment here. There are some countries who started to work on what does it mean for the standards that are currently ongoing. When I mentioned the 10 years event that we are considering into the design of infrastructure, every country is more or less different, but some countries started to say, well, we need to upgrade this kind of standards and regulation. We have to do it in a consistent way. So clearly, at least at European level, even broader, and we need the science to be the base. When I've been asked, well, which kind of scenario do you want? Well, it's not up to corporate to make this. It's clearly up to scientists and IPCC to tell us. What I just say is that at corporate, usually when we do risk assessment, we take one best scenario and one worst scenario, okay? So we manage the range of uncertainties. There are plenty of uncertainties, but economically, we know how to deal with that. So we should find the way to deal with that as well and to bring consistency here. And consistency as a second level is that indeed in the regulation and standardization, you mentioned that we work in silos. Yes, clearly. So I can point several inconsistencies in the regulation, in the standards currently. And we should at least avoid that environment also work in silo. I mean, you have mitigation, adaptation, water management, biodiversity, etc. All of this should be already considered as an overall approach, because otherwise it doesn't work. And I would suggest that from now on, every standard and regulation, even not environment, is looked at also from an environmental point of view. It's not yet the case. We tend to add up, to the existing standards, something close to it, or at the bottom or at the top of it, on environment. And that leads to a lot of inconsistencies, whereas, well, we should really systematically put environment a bit everywhere.
Yeah. You were in your first intervention, anyhow, also referring to a road in Africa that you're constructing. You were saying what type of risk level do we build in, like 1 in 10 or whatever? Yeah. Is there for you also a need to perhaps standardize on that? Do we need to work with our colleagues in different departments to say, okay, the Euro codes in this case or the other legislations should be perhaps reviewed? Take into account the science, take into account the economic models, the insurance sector. I mean, please.
Yeah, well, definitely, yes. I think, and everything is not perfect. We are dealing with a lot of uncertainties, but what we know is that it's happening. So even in the projections currently, we should allow first think the alternatives. So sometimes in the tendering process, it is just prohibited to provide an alternative. Well, far more prohibitive, it is more costly. And when I told you, well, sometimes you have to invest, or most of the time for resiliency, you have to invest more now to avoid future cost. So I would suggest first to open, to alternatives, etc., and to open also to the fact that there will be different scenarios. So we need consistency, but before we get to this consistency, and that could take years, if you want the planet and COP28 to finally agree also on the right trajectory for extreme weather events. So in between, well, at least what is the range of, well, the events that we could have, etc. And this here, we should directly integrate into a standardization, the standards that are existing already. But again, from my point of view, from Vinci, we're trying to be really proactive and to look at the solutions that we can provide. So in the design, in the right size of the equipment, etc. So this is something that at least we can work on, you know, and show to our client that, okay, well, this is reality of what you are currently building, and this is the extra thing that we can provide with the cost and the projection. So we're going to work on that, and we need, indeed, for some project, when you have financing from some private bank or development bank or etc., you know, to, well, at least to ask the question, you know, and to ask for this kind of information.
I will turn to Rachel for those questions in a moment, but for instance, to give the example on what we saw this summer in Greece, I mean, the main railway line, you know possibly, Isabel, washed away over a number of kilometers. The economical damage is there in the hundreds of millions for this railway line alone.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm also thinking, how can we jointly here also develop the necessary synergies towards the future? Because Wim also spoke about droughts, so we see this flooding. This embankment, of course, is quite a piece of art, as it is called also in construction. We can also create, for instance, wadis for the water runoff. We can create perhaps retention. We can create also solutions that are synergetic to the goals of the climate that we are addressing. And a cost in one night of hundreds of millions is to be taken into account in some way, I think.
Yeah, but that's exactly the issue, is that we add, on one hand, indeed, such cost, and on the other hand, we are not taking enough time to design the right solutions, because, again, technically, we'll find solutions. We have examples of infrastructure where already resiliency is integrated from the design, because if it comes too late, only at the construction step, it's already too late. But if you consider it at the design phase, that's something that really we can work on. Well, to start with, we can have workshop already. So putting engineering, financing, the client directly and construction company together, you know, to try to anticipate most of the events indeed, and again bring back some technical solutions with the right economic amount as well. And maybe just also to add that in terms of data management, indeed, there's a lot of things where we need protection. So I link to you directly as well. The data will be or is already accessible. So it's not an issue anymore, you know, to be able to do that. It's more about aligning, about the understanding of how to interpret that, and be able to go into action.
You want to come in, Adam? I mean.
Yeah, I'm sort of just bringing those threads together. You asked me before about where the gaps are, and I sort of come back to, you know, why am I at COP? Why is Google at COP? And, you know, one of the reasons we come to COP and other places is because we don't have all the answers. We don't understand where the gaps are. And I mentioned before, so much of what we do is working in partnership with others. And so COP is an opportunity to bring together other companies, governments, cities, scientists, whoever it may be, so that we can have these types of conversations, so that, you know, as Google, I can come away from here going, I think we found some gaps here that we might be able to help with, or some partners we can work with. So I think this is why these conversations are so important, because we're bringing all different parts of society and economy together. Let's say Google, we don't have all the answers to the gaps, but we want to learn where we can help here. I even got a round of applause. Look at that.
I will go into the real debate, but I would like to also ask Rachel to come in. Rachel, you have heard the previous speakers. I mean, the cost of inaction can be huge, but you are, like, also asked from union side, investing. So when you hear, I mean, what are your immediate reactions to this nice debate that is developing here?
So yes to everything is my immediate reaction. Absolutely agree with everything said so far. It's been said so well. I think another challenge we face, particularly as a financing institution, is that system thinking that we need to bring more to our activities, and systemic action. So as an investor, we're talking to a client, we're talking to a counterparty. They're an infrastructure owner or operator, they're a municipal government, and they're doing a project. And maybe they find this project has some risk associated with it and want to mitigate that risk. So the challenge there is we don't necessarily question whether this is the right use of scarce resources to mitigate that risk, because it is a network, it is a system where if there are alternate routes available, perhaps that's not the most efficient source of use of funding to enhance this one particular component of the network. Maybe you should use it elsewhere, someplace that's more isolated and vulnerable. But the second point is trying to act beyond the project boundaries to actually find the really efficient and effective ways of addressing that risk. So if you're working on a road that's exposed to flooding, you can build a wall, you can build some retention ponds, but the real solution might be upstream river remediation, or it might be coastal management, and that's outside of the client's control, and that's outside of potentially our influence, and the ownership of that issue is not in the room and at that table at the moment. And so those issues aren't being considered, and the potential other benefits of that better solution aren't on the table in that investment decision. So looking at the co-benefits for nature, for example, or looking at all of the other beneficiaries who would improve their flood resilience from this action. That's not just isolated to this project. So trying to get to some systemic thinking and some systemic action where all of the stakeholders can actually align their interests and activities.
Yeah. I mean, that's a very interesting point, because it is very difficult to monetize, let's say, these positive externalities that you are mentioning by preventing or by, let's say, creating synergies. But how do you in the EBRD deal with this kind of additional costs? Are you already calculating, do you have a methodology? Do you calculate them in, or how do you deal with that?
So I think this goes directly to the issue of data and accessibility, because I agree, the data is absolutely there now. The challenge is now integrating it into our processes in a user-friendly way. So we have our climate risk screens, but that doesn't necessarily translate immediately to a cost-benefit analysis, where we're looking at integrating the traffic data, the physical characteristics of the road, the climate scenarios, all into one analysis where you don't need a team of academics that code in Python to get you an answer. So really trying to make that information much quicker and not a 6-month consulting project could be really transformative.
Yeah, but thinking also, we spoke before with Isabel on, for instance, Eurocodes or legislations, but of course you as EBRD can also be there, let's say, bending the curve quite positively by your due diligence or by your CBAs that you request in steering the investments. And that's also why I feel myself also responsible with Connecting Europe facility, investing some 50 billion over 10 years to go in the direction that we would like to see with our partners like Vinci and others. How you see, do you feel like a role that the EBRD has there?
Oh, absolutely. I think we have a critical role there, and I think that we're very fortunate to be a large and high-capacity organization that can contribute to that and can provide the technical assistance or engage the consultants or partner with the universities to bring that analysis and to make those well-informed decisions with our counterparties. The challenge and next step for us in particular, I think, is to expand that conversation beyond the direct counterparty we're investing in who's borrowing from us, to bring it to government ministries or organizations, public bodies and trade institutions or trade organizations who can coordinate on the systemic actions needed and develop a financial solution that meets that the most effective way. Because we can't just be lending to, 50 million here for this wall and 50 million there for that wall, when we could lend 20 and fix the problem.
How you see the solutions then, Rachel? Should we also perhaps gather with the IFIs and other national promotional banks, and when we get the knowledge, when we get the standards, when we have the data, to set perhaps certain standards in due diligence or in other processes? Would that be a way forward?
I think coordination among the other financial institutions is particularly important, just so we're not doubling down on our adaptation investments. We don't want to gild our investments and have over-engineered solutions, or one bank investing in community resilience and the other in the engineered resilience. And we want to work together to provide a real thoughtful, integrated approach. So I think that's really important. And I'm aware that there's so much fantastic research going on, but again, potentially maybe siloed. I see high-capacity institutions that have their own fantastic models of infrastructure and resilience and vulnerabilities. And I think as a Londoner now, accent notwithstanding, I think our infrastructure systems have just fantastic capacity to understand this and act on it. And it's just slow to build that up in other contexts. So we really need those partnerships with other institutions.
Thank you for that, Rachel. I think we already start to see a little bit of, let's say, how we could be working in the future. Before I give back to you, Wim, because I saw you want to come in, ladies and gentlemen, we also open up to you now and allow for questions to the audience to be a bit more interactive here in the room, but also with people who are online. Whether you would like to raise any questions via Slido, then that will be opened up now. And we see your questions coming in. I will share them with the panel. But we also are having quite a nice discussion amongst us. So, Wim, you wanted to come in and react. Please do, whilst we wait for the questions coming in at the same time.
Okay, thank you. I think when it comes to climate change adaptation to extreme events, I think one of the things to bear in mind is that you want to avoid maladaptation, and that you want to avoid implementing adaptation measures for one target, but that you're then making the vulnerability to another type of extreme worse. If you look at the Netherlands, I'm not suggesting they do maladaptation, but if you look at the Netherlands, they are world leading in keeping the water out with their coastal defenses, given the catastrophic flooding that they have been experiencing in the 1950s, in 1953. So they have been developing all this infrastructure to evacuate the water as quickly as possible. Now, in the last 5 years, they have been facing an exceptional drought. So this country is now faced with the challenge of protecting themselves against too much water, but at the same time they need to protect themselves against too little water. So when you do this in infrastructure adaptation, you have to adapt to a range of hazards. For example, floods and droughts, which are escalating at the same time. So this really requires for this holistic perspective, this multi-hazard perspective, when you're doing developing this adaptation. I think one more point to also make is that there is the concept of limits to adaptation. So you can implement, and we should implement adaptation measures as much as we can. At some point, you have just limits to what you can do. If you make the analogy with the physical body, you can implement heat plans as much as you want to protect, and they are very effective in reducing vulnerability of humans to heat. Those heat adaptation plans have saved a lot of lives already. But there is also a physical limit to the amount of heat that a body can bear, and it's a wet bulb temperature of 35 degrees. I'm not going into the details of explaining that, but there's just a hard physical limit. And you can, well, if you reach that point, no adaptation plan will help, except just, well, staying or leaving the region as a whole, staying inside or leaving the region, migrating out of that region. So we have to be mindful of this, let's say, limits to adaptation. And from that perspective, the cheapest form of adaptation is climate change mitigation. So every euro you invest in mitigation is several euros that you save at the global perspective, in terms of climate change adaptation that you have to implement. That said, we will need, obviously, to invest also and to increase our speed up our adaptation, because this has been also, let's say, undervalued in past conversations. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, you immediately want to react, but I also have a question in the room already. So perhaps, I don't know whether we have a microphone here in the room that people can use, or... But please, Isabel, already react from your side, and Adam, you want to come in? Then I will ask the gentleman to make himself known.
I wanted to comment really on maladaptation, because that was also a point I wanted to make. And when we want to standardize, at some point we need to standardize the performance. We need to be resilient, but not the mean to go there. And I can take the easy example of heat waves, air conditioning, and solution-based, nature-based solutions, sorry. Indeed, well, to manage heat waves, part of the solution is to avoid indeed having too much heating, and nature can help here. But to bring back nature into cities or schoolyards, etc., despite the fact that the economic model is not so easy to reach, we try to calculate, the avoided cost of not having climatized air conditioning, etc., but it's really limited amount compared to the investment. When you say that you want nature, but you want nature with water, meaning that indeed you need to make sure that the trees are watered, so you need to rethink the networks, how to store maybe stormwater, etc., etc. So that's a full range of solutions coming together that are already existing and available. So again, technically, even these kind of solutions are available, but I want to emphasize that the result is a performance to be able to live within a less than 30 or 35 degrees building, for instance. And the solutions could be purely technical, like air conditioning, and that's a risk of emitting more greenhouse gases at the same time, or indeed a combination between nature-based solutions and maybe also air conditioning for really the extreme heat waves.
Adam, a quick reaction as well, because I want really to turn now to the dialogue.
Yeah, no, I'll be very quick. I think I just wanted to pick up on the point Wim was making and bringing together the intersection of climate and health, because I think that's also very relevant when we're talking about transportation here, because actually if pollution levels are so high or it's extreme heat outside, that may change your choice to, do I go on a walk? Do I take public transportation? Do I take a car? And I think increasingly, and certainly something we're working on and bringing these things together, we want to use that to help inform those transportation choices as well, because you know, sometimes walking may not be that best option, and it may be safer to do something else. So.
Extremely valid point, Arnold, you're making. Please, if you can tell you who you are, you perhaps stand up and then everybody sees you.
Of course. I can stand up. I'm Luc Bas, and I'm the director of a new climate risk assessment center that the Belgian government has put forward. And of course, this session is extremely interesting because you have the risks very well identified with Wim's intervention, and then some of the ideas on solutions. And of course, everything stops with the money or the investment or no investment. So the first question would be, because many of these investments are public investments, we have to be honest. So which arguments do you think are the ones that will ring with governments to actually do the extra investment to avoid the later cost? It's the first. And the second, because the center that I'm leading now, which is just kicking off, we are going to advise the National Security Council. Are there any security arguments that you would think of to convince the governments to move forward? Because when it comes to security, then sometimes the money starts to flow. So is there any ideas on how to link it to security from a transport anticipation perspective?
Yes. Luc, these are very, very nice questions. Thank you for them. Anybody who want to come in? Rachel, you want to, yeah?
Yes, so we've typically taken the avoided costs approach and tried to articulate the real full losses of transport disruptions to the government. So it's not just the asset destruction, it's not just the immediate loss of lives, it's that ongoing disruption that leads to just ongoing delays, slowdown of business, increased emissions because everyone's taking inefficient routes, the costs of the carbon costs of rebuilding, but also that second order impact of there's an economic slowdown associated with that brings lower incomes to people, that brings lower tax base to the government, that increases their social costs, and there's a big number associated with it that's often sort of hidden behind the other numbers. So if we can bring that number to the government, it's often more compelling than that just direct damage cost we get in the headlines afterwards. Also, I think there's not just a security issue in terms of making sure that these routes remain available for emergency responders, disaster response that can reduce those losses in the immediate recovery phase, but also potentially equity issues that can really resonate not with just the governments, but with donors who might want to support these investments, recognizing that some of the most vulnerable communities are also some of the most loosely connected and can be really benefiting from enhancing resilience of the transport assets that they rely on. So there's a few margins that we try to go down, but in the end, it does come down to prioritization and the other competing demands that the cities or the governments face on their limited budgets and resources.
Thank you, Rachel, for that answer. In fact, Luc, I think the question that you're raising also came to our mind, in particular this autumn in September, when northern Italy was cut off on the different axes that link it to the rest of the continent. Completely cut off. And at that moment in time, you have a disruption of society. And at that moment in time, it didn't occur so far, that and Mont-Cenis, and Mont Blanc, and Brenner, and Gotthard were all cut off at the same time for about a week. And the impact on GDP was like 2% if it would continue. So we had a real disruption, and disruptions can lead into security questions as well. So I'm happy that you raised that issue. I think that I don't want to run to the conclusions, but it is something that we have to take into account. I have a question coming in here also. Why isn't there an early warning system? Adam, perhaps for you. Why isn't there an early warning system? You talked about that.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there are early warning systems out there. As I say, at Google, we've particularly focused on things like floods, wildfires. We're looking at hurricanes, other weather impacts as well. And we look to surface that through our tools and solutions, whether that's Google Search or through Android and what have you. But increasingly, as I say, we are working with others, and we've been on. We've got partnerships and are engaged with the WMO's work there, and so I think I think we're going to need more of them. Unfortunately, Wim's explained why, but we're all seeing that on a regular basis. So I think we want to be actively part of that. We want to be part of the solution here. I think from a technology point of view, there's a lot we can do, and we want to see where we can play a positive role there.
Yeah. I have another question here. Are you also thinking about making safe infrastructure? For example, during the 2021 floods, a German highway flooded and people drowned. Isabel, perhaps for you, safety related.
Yeah, well, that's a direct question of indeed safety and security. What we have to do is really to save people's lives. That's reality. So when we are on highways with a fire close to the highways or flooding event, etc., it happened already 18 months ago in France. We had to call helicopters to extract people out of their cars. So that was the situation. So I mean that's definitely where we stand. At the same time, I think the role will be to anticipate enough, so to be able, link back to the warning, the way to indeed have the knowledge of the event ahead to be able to close some services. But that's also a political decision to make. So to be able to stop some services, some function, to avoid indeed too much losses, and not only physical losses.
Yeah. Wim, a question here. What do you see the role of government? You're a scientist. What do you see the role of government, particularly transport department, is said here, in adaptation? I mean, with your knowledge, where do you want things to move?
Yes, so I think there's real need for governments to take up the latest scientific information regarding the risks, and the risk is a combination of hazard, exposure, and vulnerability, and there's a real scientific challenge to provide that information. But there's already also a lot of information available, especially on hazards, hazard projections. There's a lot of information available. So the role of governments, in my view, is to take that information into account and then to set up regulations and standards that new infrastructure should meet in order to be resilient against those adaptation measures and against those rising extremes. And I think if you look at the three components, I think there's on the three components of risk, so hazard, exposure, and vulnerability, on all three of those pillars, there's potential for governance to increase the ambition to set standards. On the hazards, you can work through climate change mitigation, and better also warning systems, which are already often in place, but information may not reach the target audience. I think that's a big challenge. In terms of exposure, it's when you plan new infrastructure, do you put it in, do you place it in low-level coastal zones, as you've seen the example? Do you place it in inundation areas, floodplain areas, or do you build it elsewhere? So that's exposure. And vulnerability is, how can you make it that it can cope with these extreme events, if they even occur? So on each of these pillars, governments have the possibility to set standards.
Yeah. We have another question here in the room. Sir.
Thank you very much. So my name is Gordon Rattray. I work for European Disability Forum. I share some of the emotions that were expressed by the panel about the fact that these are frightening times, but I see it also as a huge opportunity. I'm interested to know in how far the work that you can do can make sure that mass transport systems are going to be fully accessible to everyone, including persons with disabilities. I'm talking about accessibility of buses, trains, also the infrastructure around these areas. It's not only a moral and a legal obligation, but it also ensures that people with disabilities can participate in society, in education, in employment, and it also ensures that they can evacuate safely when natural events end up leading to disasters. So I want to know how far you can ensure that the accessibility standards are implemented and enforced.
Yeah. Gordon, that's a great question, and thank you for EDF to be present here today. It's also a question a little bit to me, I think. We have legislation in place on accessibility, and we in fact also just launched another package from DG Move side out that will further contribute and shall help with passengers in their rights. I mean, passenger right legislation that we just proposed specifically foresees a number of increased, let's say, functions for instance, the terminal and also the operators, terminal operators, but also transport operators. For instance, in a way that persons with certain disabilities shall be helped in that transition between the different transport modes, or shall be helped also in the accessibility of the transport modes and in the way that you can use them. But I see your question, and I like that you come in also in this debate, because of course, let's say the density or the problems that are linked to with this increased changed environment will only, let's say, exacerbate the needs that you have. Anybody wants to come in on that? I don't know who would.
No, just you asked the question of how to make sure that we integrate all of that, and it's not by only following regulation and standards, it's also by working with you directly.
That's a very fair answer, I think, Gordon. Anybody in the room? Yes, there are questions here in the room still. Please.
Thank you all very much. My name is Ian Hitchcock. I'm a Master's of Public Policy student at Duke University. And I wanted to pull on one of the threads a little bit more that y'all identified earlier, which is the difficulty of internalizing the externalities. It strikes me that in this space, we have a lot of misaligned incentives with things like, you know, projects getting approved based on maybe having a lower bid amount, for instance, which they may get by passing on some of those externalities. So I'm wondering, from y'all's experience, either on the policy side or on the business side, are there particular policies or incentives that may be useful in trying to realign the ways in which we actually fund these projects? Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know, Rachel, or we talked about the externalities before.
I hate to rely on regulation, but I'm an economist, but regulation really, you know, we're one financial institution, we can impose our own standards, but fundamentally it comes down to if we impose our standards far too high, people won't borrow from us. That's the reality. We can offer the most concessional finance in the world, but if we are asking things that are undeliverable or completely out of market, it's not going to happen. So there does need to be enhanced regulation that makes sure that this is being considered.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe another angle is that there's no easy way, and I think we need to address every part of a topic, starting by science, academics, but also policies, business, insurance, etc., etc. And I just want to say that we should not wait for others to move. So that's why we move at a very modest scale, which is take one project, bring the right people and partners around the table, and try to find this model and the solutions together, and then take another one, etc. So it's really a small way to go, but that's action from the beginning.
Thank you. Gentlemen, please.
Yes, good morning. I'm Maxime Bureau from 3M Company. We don't do only post-it notes, but also products for the infrastructure for roads, as you know, road marking, traffic signs. Question maybe for you, for the Commission. Could you tell us, because we see infrastructure today, we discuss regulation, but also there are budgets.
Yes.
So can you maybe give us a bit of an update? There are many initiatives at European level, so on the budgets, what you have done in recently, projects, so to give us all ideas, and how maybe we can better help the Commission to execute its policy. Thank you.
Thank you. I will try to be short because quite a plethora of budgets available. The main thing that I would like to achieve together with science, with IT, with construction, and with the financiers is that when we spend the money, it is spent wisely. So if we are investing about 50 billion across 2 periods in the Connecting Europe facility, I would like these investments to be in such a way that they can be climate resilient. And infrastructures we are building now are often there for more than a century. So if we are taking the science that Wim will provide with the IPCC into account, there will be consequences for those who finance, like IFIs and us. There will be consequences for those who construct, like Vinci. There will be consequences for those who inform, like Google. And we need to bring this, as Wim said, there is only 1.5 page in the whole IPCC report. We need to bring that at a higher level of knowledge. And then it will reflect throughout a number of, not only the financing tools, it can reflect perhaps also in legislation, like the Euro codes of my colleagues in DG GROW. It will reflect in a number of areas and in cooperating also with companies like 3M, for sure. It will reflect on safety. It will reflect on the question that we had before from the new center in Belgium on perhaps resilience and linked to security. So all of these aspects are to be taken into account. It's quite a new field, which is, I would say, surprising given the importance of it. But yeah, for sure. Were there other questions here in the room? Yes, please.
Hello, thank you for this inspiring discussion. My name is Janneke de Vries. I'm from the World Resources Institute, and I have a question about the systems change approaches, because listening to this discussion, I think we can only solve this in an integrated and a systems change approach. And my question is actually to the member state, but also to the Commission. What can you do to make it that policy making is more supported by system change approaches? Because I think that is something that we have to work on together to make that that next step. But looking forward to hear your views on this.
Yeah. Thank you, Janneke, for that question. In fact, already at one point in the discussion, I referred to the synergies. I mean, if we are constructing highways, railroads, ports and airports, where I would like to come is that you have synergies between, for instance, transport and energy, between transport and water management. If we are constructing railroads over long distance, how can we cater for runoff water? How can we capture and also store? How can we make sure that we then improve also, for instance, on carbon sink? How can we do all these things together between the different sectors, because it needs a holistic approach. But here I can invite Wim and others to certainly come in. Please, Wim.
Yeah, I just want to echo what you said in the sense that when you build solutions, you can tackle multiple sustainable development goals at once, and this can go via water management, this can go via carbon, like land-based carbon dioxide removal, it can be also via renewable energy production, electricity production. When you build transport lines, that you also develop solar and wind power production along these linear structures which are intervening in the landscape. But if you bring these different types of infrastructure together, you can actually build towards making, let's say, climate positive infrastructure, and actually the transport line can become a producer of low emission electricity. So I see a lot of potential there to have synergies between the transport and the energy sector when it comes to mitigation and adaptation at the same time.
So just to briefly intervene, because we are running also out of time, so I need to be mindful here. I will ask you all to come in, perhaps taking also this question as a kind of inspiration for a last round in order to make time being respected. Rachel, you want to come in already? Please do, and then I will launch another Slido.
Just to say that we are trying to increase that systems thinking in our own investments. When we're working with the road operator and we identify some integrated, connected system of systems that could either invest in resilience that benefits the client, or that the client could be investing in something that benefits that system, we are trying to identify that analytically. And then for us, it becomes a business development exercise, honestly, at that point, going to then the relevant ministry or stakeholder and laying out this analysis for them and seeing if they want to move it forward. So policy is helpful, but we also have, I guess, some hustle to do and to bring that information to others.
It's an excellent question, Janneke. It would need another debate of another 1.5 hours. Ladies and gentlemen, we have seen a fantastic debate this morning here. I'm going to launch one more Slido where you could come in during the coming minutes whilst we will take the final remarks of all of the panelists. So if you can give your views and takeaways and share it here via the Slido poll, We would create another word cloud here. You can do it in the way you would like. What is the most important takeaway? And you send us your word that you would like to see appearing here in the Slido. With the panelists, I would like to ask you, after this debate, how you see this, let's say, new area of work that we are launching from the transport side in this opening panel on the Transport Day here. Just give your, let's say, 1.5 minute takeaway, recommendation, way forward. From my side, what I can say is that we will, of course, come back to this theme because you know that we have this study being developed. We have the work also on decarbonized construction ongoing. We will have Connecting Europe Days from the 2nd till the 5th of April, where we will gather some 3,000 people in Brussels, where this will be one of the key 4 themes to be debated, because we really would like to address the full, let's say, community that is dealing with this issue. So whoever would like to start, 1.5 minutes to conclude, and meanwhile we'll see the words coming in. Who kicks it? Adam kicks it.
Happy to jump in. I mean, I think, again, you know, we're here because we think technology can be a fundamental part of the solution here, both in terms of mitigation, adaptation, and resiliency. We actually launched a report a couple of weeks ago with BCG all around the role of AI for climate action, talking about some of the things we're doing, but solutions right across the industry, making recommendations on policies, etc. And so worth having a look at that. But I think all of this goes back to, and this question on system thinking as well, is we can only if we do this if we work together. You know, if we work in silos, we're not going to achieve what we want to do. So I think, you know, I go back to my point as well, it's why we're here at COP. So we're really keen to understand who we need to work with, how we can work together, because it's only together we're going to make the advances we need.
Thank you, Adam. That's great. Rachel, you want to come in?
Yeah, I've been really excited about this conversation. I think we're poised on a potential for change where things are coming together, the data availability is there, the understanding of the importance is there, and what I see as the next step is the prioritization needs to be there. We sort of understand at a high level this is a real issue, but there are so many other real issues that have political will behind them or that have, you know, really visible impacts for constituencies, that this needs to escalate up the agenda, and yeah, some money's missing. So with that information, hopefully we can get that as a priority.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you.
I'd like to say that, yes, the challenge is really huge, but I think that we have a lot of willingness also to act. There's the hashtag #ActNow. That's where we should start as well. And again, not wait for the others to move forward. At the short term, at least at one city, one region, one infrastructure level, bring the right people around the table and think with this overall and systemic approach that we were discussing.
Thank you, Isabel. Wim.
Yeah, I think we feel the impacts of climate change not via the mean average warming, but we feel climate change via this escalation of climate extremes. And the younger you are, the more extremes you will experience. And this, for me, highlights that dealing with climate change is a matter of intergenerational justice at the basis. But also the transport sector will experience this increased exposure to climate extremes. And if you look at critical European transport infrastructure, it will have to deal with increasing heat waves, but also wildfires, droughts, and river floods. And I think in terms of solutions, I think climate change mitigation and adaptation, they go hand in hand in alleviating the impacts that are associated with this escalating exposure. Thank you.
Thank you, Wim. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we had a fantastic debate here this morning with these 4 panelists. You see from the Slido cloud that we need to act now together and work ahead. This is what we want to do. If I take the 2 slides of Wim, we work clearly for the future and for our children. They will experience these extremes very, very often. And we need to do everything we can in order to get to a better future in the world. It's certainly something that is crucial. And Wim, I think that your slide that you showed for Europe should be multiplied for all of the continents of this world that they are gathering in COP. I hope that there will be climate science elaborated in the years to come, because it was very clear here that we need that kind of science in order to develop standards and recommendations and all ways of cooperation across all of the sectors. So Wim, Adam, Isabel, and Rachel, thank you very much, and I think they deserve really an applause. Thank you.